Hey Jason, welcome buddy. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Maybe we can start by telling us a bit about yourself. I know your activity quite well, but for the listeners, how would you introduce yourself? What will be the main points?
Yeah, so I'm a software developer, have been for many years professionally since about 2005. And then I started in the mid 90s when I was a kid. For the last 10 to 15 years, I've been working with Ruby on Rails. And I do a lot of writing and speaking. So I recently came out with a book, which I think we're going to talk about today. I do a lot of blogging, speaking at conferences. I host my own conference. I have a YouTube channel, a podcast, basically any kind of stuff that you can do around teaching programming. I'm doing it in some form. So and I focus mainly on Ruby on Rails with quite a lot of focus on testing.
Okay, okay. Super nice, super. Indeed, I always forget the conference. Yeah. So you recently launched a new book, Professional Race Testing Tools and Principles. Maybe we can start from here. Just I did read of the book, but how would you describe the content? How if you would have to give a a short guided tour to the content?
Yeah. Um, yeah, so this is kind of a distillation of my experience teaching testing over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Um, a lot of testing education focuses on tools, libraries, syntax, and stuff like that. And I do get into that, but that's in kind of the second half of the book. The first half of the book focuses mostly on testing principles. So I actually have the book right in front of me here. If I read off the first few chapters, first I talk about the concept of tests as specifications, which I think is the most important idea in the book, maybe the most important idea in testing. But hardly anybody talks about that. But I start off with that in the book because I think it's really important. And then in the next chapter, I go really deep into, well, not super deep, but I go into the test-driven development process. And I talk specifically about, okay, everybody knows red, green, refactor, but why? Why do we do it this way? Why do we have the red step? What are the reasons why we write a failing test before we write the code to make it pass? And I try to leave no stone unturned in answering those why questions. So not just here's what to do, but here's the logical reasons behind this. A lot of testing education tells you what to do, but not why. I really wanted to get to the why also. And the other two chapters I'll mention regarding testing principles are writing meaningful tests. That's the next chapter. Because I see a lot of test suites where the tests are there, but maybe they're not that meaningful. They don't test, they don't make complete sense as tests. And then the last one I'll mention right now is writing understandable tests. Again, a lot of the test suites I look at, the tests are there, but they're not very easy to understand. And you're going to have to read these tests and extend them and modify them and stuff like that. And so if they're not easy to understand, then you're going to have a hard time not only maintaining your tests, but the application code as well. So to kind of sum it up, the book focuses, if there's only one thing I can get across with
Mhm.
the book, it's testing principles.
Okay, okay. And indeed, I mean the book it has Rails in its name, but I think many of the principles you talk. Actually, I will recommend this book to any developer. Doesn't matter the language. I think, as you said, many principles are language agnostic. It's much more about a specific mindset and a way of doing things. But and you have many years of experience on this side. What are the main two errors you see developers making when picking up, when starting making tests, or even experienced developers? If you have to pick like the first two things that pop
Yeah.
into your mind.
Well, I can at least pick the first one. I mentioned that I opened the book talking
Mhm,
about
mhm.
test specifications, and so probably the biggest mistake is when people haven't adopted this idea yet of tests as specifications. And it's kind of a nuanced idea. It's hard to communicate. I'm actually going to open my book to that page right now because I have an analogy in the book, which is my attempt to explain it. Um, a lot of, excuse me, Bob Martin has this quote: um, "Testing is about specification, not verification." And
Mhm.
so, a lot of the tests that I see, they reveal to me that the developer, when they wrote them, was thinking about
Verifying.
verification. It does this, blah blah blah, and it's all like positive confirmations. It seems to be focused around capabilities. Again, it can do this, it can do that, rather than something more like, under such and such scenario, this is how it behaves, and under a different scenario, this other way is how it behaves.
Mhm.
With the
I see.
distinguishing factor being, we're in this one scenario or another, and there are these two different behavior paths based on that one thing being different. So that's how I would explain that idea. And once you grasp that, it's like a huge shift, and all your tests will be written, maybe not radically differently, um, but there's a shift in the tests that just makes a huge difference in how meaningful they are, how understandable they are, um, and how well they will serve you in maintaining your application code. So I think that's the most
Yeah.
important thing.
Actually, if I have to uh, summarize what I understood, is a lot of shifting in the perspective. This is not your first book on Rails testing. Before starting the project and so on, have you done any product validation? Have you, or the book just came out of you? I mean, it was like, I really need to write this. Or have you did, I don't know, some market research or something like that? How was it?
Well, I've been in this area for a number of years now. I started teaching testing in like 2018. As we speak, it's late 2024. So it was the beginning of 2018. So that's basically 7 years at this
Yeah,
point. I've been teaching testing. So by the time I started this book, maybe a year ago, it was not experimental. Um, I had written two ebooks prior to this, both on the same topic, and those books both did well enough that I knew I could have a reasonable expectation that if I wrote this book, it wouldn't be a waste of time. Maybe it's not going to make me rich overnight or something
yeah.
like that, but people are going to buy it and read it. I knew that I could expect that based on how the previous books went. So yeah, I just did it because it was not experimental.
I see, I see, I see. And you mentioned that you started to write the book 1 year ago. How did the process look like? Did you commit, like, I don't know, there are writers who commit like, "Oh, I will stay at least 1 hour and write, or I will write 1,000 words per day," or something like that. How was your process? Or did you have a process first of all?
Yeah, this kind of work is a little tough because it falls into the category of important but not urgent.
Yeah.
You can put it off until tomorrow, and then tomorrow you can put it off to the next day, and nothing bad will ever happen if you don't do it, but also nothing good will ever happen
Yeah.
either. And so you have to force it in. What I've found that works for me is working on it for like an hour every day. I've tried in the past, like taking a Friday and like putting it all on Friday. For me, that never works. I always end up being like too busy with other things and the work never happens. But I usually found that almost every day I can I can squeeze it in somehow. working an hour on the book. And not every day is an hour. Maybe one day I can only work on it for 20 minutes. But I think even 20 minutes every single day is better than like a couple hours once a week, because you have that constant thread. You can
Mm,
remember what you did yesterday.
exactly.
You don't have to have that startup time where you have to remember what you did last week or whatever. So that's how I approached it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can relate a lot to this because this is how I also wrote the LangChain, the book on LangChain. For me, when I was working on the book, that was maybe the most pleasant moment of the day. I was looking forward to
Yeah.
free up the time to be able to put two more pages.
Yeah, that's how it started with my book, because the beginning is relatively easy, but then, especially in the end, when I had to get everything like completely polished, that was, I almost kind of dreaded it because I knew it was going to be very like mentally demanding, labor intensive work. But still, it's always a treat to be able to work on it because I'm working on something that's just for me. It's not for anybody else. It's also like an investment in my future and stuff like that. So it feels really nice to work on that. So you have a book also?
Yeah, it's LangChain for JavaScript developers. I will send you the link. Yeah.
I see. And are you working
It's
on that now or is it already out?
it's out, and I'm working on a new one. I'm working on one about LangGraph. LangGraph, it's a tool to manage AI agents. It's basically made by the same team as the LangChain. It's another product from the LangChain team, and yeah, currently I'm working on this book on the LangGraph, and exactly the same feeling. I'm looking forward to the moment I have a bit of time to add a few more pages.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, actually, Joseph Stribny, the author of Deployment from Scratch, you had him at in a podcast interview, and he was saying that the most hard thing on writing a book is to determine the scope, to know when to
Yeah.
stop, to maybe also as in software. One more feature. By any
Mhm.
chance, did you track the total number of hours that went into producing the book?
Oh no. If I did, it would be too depressing.
Okay. Okay. I have this small obsession with tracking the hours, and I'm curious all the time to compare how other folks and how much do they invest.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
if you do some napkin math, it's maybe like an hour a day for a year. It's like 300
Mm.
hours. You know,
Okay.
I guess
Give or take.
365 hours if I can remember how many days are in a year, but something roughly like that.
Okay. Nice. Uh, Now that the book is finished, what advice would you give yourself if you would have to start again? What advice would you give to someone who is considering writing a technical book?
Um, Honestly, I think the way that it happened for me was just about as good as it could be. I started small. I started by blogging, and once I got some traction with that, I wrote a relatively small ebook. And that was good because, okay, so I always try to keep the effort proportionate to the certainty of the payoff.
Mhm.
I don't want to bet more than I can afford to lose. And so I didn't want to just start by writing a book because I didn't know if there would be a payoff. And a book is a lot of effort. So I started with blogging, small bets, small payoffs. Then I did a small book. It was a risk, but it was not a bet that was bigger than I could afford to lose. If I had written that book and it didn't sell very well, no big deal. That book sold well enough. And then a couple years later, I looked back at the original book and I was embarrassed. And so I said, I really need to redo this book. So I did. And I launched it. And that one went way better from a sales perspective. Um, Same thing happened again. A few years later, I looked back at that book. I was embarrassed. And so I not just that, but there was so much more that I wanted to say, because as the years go, not only do I learn more about testing, but I learn more about teaching testing. And so I learned better how to teach it. And so I wanted a book that reflected like my most up to date way of teaching it and the most up to date lessons that I wanted to share. So I did that. And actually, this time I was not mainly going for revenue. My main reason for writing this is like credibility,
Mhm.
because I'm doing consulting now. I've been doing consulting for almost 2 years, full time for about 1 year. Um, and a book is like a really, really good business card, you know? Um,
Correct.
you can, instead of handing somebody a business card, you can hand somebody your book and be like, here, I wrote this book. And they will just like assume that you know what you're talking about. Especially if the book is good, they don't have to assume. They can just read what's in the book and be like, oh, I would totally trust this guy if I
Correct.
hired him to do something, because like I don't have to guess. I can see I can see what's in his mind basically, and I can have an idea of what would happen if I were to hire him. And so that was my main motivation. And in fact, this book has actually not sold as well as the last book on the same topic, which is a little bit surprising. But I'm okay with that because, again, I'm not going for biggest revenue. I'm going for highest credibility impact. And that's why for this version, I did a print version. For the previous two, it was just ebook only. But this one, you can actually buy it on Amazon and get a book in the mail in 2 days or whatever, and hold it in your hand, which again, I think if people are actually able to hold it in their hand, first of all, I
That's
think a lot of people are more likely to read it,
yeah.
because I'm guilty of that very common thing of buying an ebook and then maybe reading a page or two and then forgetting that it exists. And I personally don't really like to read on the computer anyway. So I think more people will read it. And plus, you can, I don't know, you can like have the book open on your desk while you're coding and stuff like that. You can show the book to somebody, give it to somebody. So I think there's additional benefits that come with a print book over just an ebook.
Correct. Correct. Indeed. Indeed. There was I remember, I forget the name, but on Twitter I read something like, "Is not what you gain from directly from the book, but it's what you gain because of that book." Like the
That's definitely the way
credibility,
I'm
the
looking at it.
events, and so exactly right. I'm with you on the on totally the same page. Um, Me personally, I've been following you for quite of years online, as I told you when we met in Bucharest, and I know a bit about your story all your endeavors, starting from selling a book. I know that you had a really nice podcast episode where you tell the story of selling something like 7,000 or something like that. The launch, the story of the launch of the book. And after that, on jasonsweet.net, you have entrepreneurship journals, which for me, these are one of the main resources. I send someone who is coming, like, I want to quit my job. It's super cool to be entrepreneur. Really? Are you really go? First of all, read Jason's entries, and if you are okay, if you have the stomach to take that, I mean, because it's a very down to earth and realistic story. It's not like I started today and 1 year later I was making 1 million from an app or stuff like that. So I really admire your openness and your story and like all of your teachings. But if you would be able now, Jason from 2024, to travel back in time 5 years ago or 10 years ago and speak with your younger self, what advice would you give younger Jason on entrepreneurship?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, I'm very flattered. Thank you for the kind words. What would I tell myself if I could go back then? That's a really interesting question that I honestly haven't thought a ton about. But there certainly are some things that I would tell myself. So you might be familiar with this, Daniel, from reading jasonswett.net, depending how deep you went. But I started in 2011. I started a business which was scheduling software for hair
Hair
salons.
salons. Yeah, 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 yeah. I know.
Yeah, and for all sorts of reasons, which we can get into if you want, it was a terrible idea, just doomed from the start. And I spent 5 years on it. Um,
5 years.
yeah, five
Wow.
years, and it never made more than $500 a month. So it really, I had like 10 customers. It hardly ever went anywhere in 5 years. Um, and I was thinking that maybe I would tell myself something about that, but I don't know because like I learned so much. I, you know,
Understand.
I guess it would be nice if instead of learning that stuff by spending 5 years doing it, I could just learn it by having me come from the future and spend 5 minutes listening to myself.
Good.
I guess that would be nice. But almost everything I've done has taught me some invaluable lesson that I'm using now. Like I think you might be aware of my new endeavor,
With consulting.
SaturnCI. Yeah, so I haven't done like a product attempt like this
Mhm,
in a long time. From 2011 to 2015 was Snip, this hair salon software.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
And then I had maybe a little couple other dabblings with different ideas, but nothing very serious. I kind of switched to info products for like 2012 uh to now, like 2024. So a good 10 years or so. But now I'm making another attempt at a product business because there's two things that I finally have, which are very rare. And since I finally have them now, I want to seize the opportunity. And those two things are I have what I think is a viable product idea, a CI platform, um, and I have the flexibility in my schedule and work situation and all that to actually do it.
Okay.
Yeah, and so going back to what we're talking about, um, I'm incorporating so many lessons from everything I've learned over the last, 15 years or
Yeah.
whatever into this endeavor. And we can
Correct.
talk specifically about what those are if you want, but there's so many mistakes that I made in the past that I know
Uh,
not to make now.
who said this? I think Steve Jobs, but you can only connect the dots by looking backwards.
Mm,
The important thing is to always keep doing stuff. And after that, you'll start to connect all of these dots. But first of all, you have to place all of these dots on the map before you're able to connect them.
yeah, yeah, I've definitely found that to be true.
Indeed, indeed. Um, And somehow in the same line, you mentioned at one point, in one podcast, was a podcast I think about financial independence or something like that. And I really like what you said there, that the fact that instead of taking your savings and investing them into stocks, you take those savings and you are using them as a runway to build your business. Basically, you are investing in yourself. Is still holding up? Are you still on the same idea, or can you elaborate on this topic? I really liked how you framed it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if that's exactly what I said, or if I said it that way, maybe I don't still agree with it. Um, but like, if I were a more responsible, disciplined person, I would definitely have more like savings and traditional
Mhm.
investments and stuff like that. But when people hear the word investing, they usually think about the stock market and stuff like that. But an investment can be so many different things. Like just reading a book, for example, is an investment. Um, and so I've invested in these things, like writing this book and going to conferences and stuff like that. Like when I went to Romania and you
Yeah,
and I met. That was an investment.
an
I spoke at
investment,
a conference
exactly,
there.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and these things aren't measurable. What was the payoff from speaking at that conference? Like, I don't know. Like, I'll never know.
Mm,
Um, but certainly, if I never do any of this stuff, like, there will be no payoff from that
indeed.
investment. The payoff comes cumulatively from all those investments put together. Although you can hardly ever make an attribution from a result back to a cause.
Indeed, 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 indeed. Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, to not always speak the traditional way. Indeed, you may not see the results right now, but somewhere you may meet someone now, and in 5 years, that person may make a big difference in your life. You never know. The idea is keep doing things. Uh,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and by the way, I want to share how you and I met. So I
yeah,
went to Romania to speak at Friendly RB, which, by the way, was an excellent conference. I really want to go again if I can. Um, and I don't remember exactly how it happens. Maybe how it happened. Maybe I sent out an email saying that I was going to be in
yes,
Romania, and you saw
and
the email and you said,
yeah,
"Hey,
and I replied,
yeah, yeah." And then we met at my hotel. We had a coffee together,
yeah,
and that was really nice. And part of the reason I bring that up is because, like, I will often meet with people, even if, like, we don't really know anything about each other or anything like that. But I don't try to filter and be like, oh, is this like some big shot important person or something like that, like the CTO of some company or something like that. Um, because you never know where things are going to come from. Like, I had no idea at the time that you and I would be doing a podcast.
exactly.
What is it? A year later,
One,
roughly.
yes, exactly, exactly. Very close to 1 year. Yeah,
Yeah, and who knows what this will lead to?
exactly.
Maybe you'll get some benefit out of it. Maybe I'll get some benefit out of it. Maybe we both will. Who knows? It's just like planting a bunch of seeds and then seeing what grows.
Exactly, exactly. I so agree with you. And exactly in the same line, you have a very long-lasting podcast. 200, oh, getting close to 215 episodes. So congratulations and keep going. I mean,
Thank you.
there aren't too many that can say this. Uh, First of all, I'm interested in your motivation. What is keep driving you to invest time? Because in order to produce, I made for me, it takes, I don't know, close to 10 hours to speak with the guest, to set up the questions, to have the actual podcast. So it takes a lot of time if you to edit and write the email and so on. What drives you? What are your main motivations for investing so much
Oh,
time in
interesting. Well, by the way,
250 episodes?
you want to take a guess at how long it takes me to produce a 1 hour podcast
I,
episode?
I'm really curious. Exactly. That was actually one of my next questions. So yeah, please.
About 1 hour, 10 minutes.
That's
An hour to
fantastic.
record it, and then 10 minutes for everything else. Because, like, when I invite somebody on the podcast, it's my approach is just like, hey, do you want to come on the Code with Jason
Mhm,
podcast?
mhm.
And then it's just a yes or no. And if it's yes, I send them a scheduling link. And then when we get on the call, we just hit record, talk, and then I
I
send
see.
it to my editing guy for some very light
Mhm,
editing.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and that's all there is to it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I did it that way intentionally because I knew if that I did, what you might call a good job with the
Mhm.
podcast, it would be too much. Like, I wouldn't be able to sustain it.
Good point.
And so the fact that it only costs me like an hour and 10 minutes to do a podcast means that I can do it sustainably, and I'll be able to, again, not betting more than I can afford to lose. If I
Mhm,
do this 1 hour a week podcast and nothing ever comes of it, that's not a huge deal because I can afford an hour a week.
mhm.
You asked what my motivations are. Um, I started the podcast around the same time I was starting. writing about Rails testing, and I don't remember if I already had a book out there or not, but I was
Okay.
speaking at conferences. I was starting to do all this. Some people call it like personal brand entrepreneur stuff. And I thought that a podcast made a lot of sense as part of that picture. Because different people will consume different formats. Some people like podcasts, other people don't. Some people read blogs, other people don't. Some people consume multiple different kinds of
Hmm.
media,
Hmm.
and these things synergize. You mentioned that you've read my personal blog and you've listened to my podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's other people who do the same thing, and a lot of these people are the same people who come to my conference and buy my book and stuff like that. So I think these all,
Excellent.
again, I don't know what's gonna bear fruit, and so I just plant all these different seeds with the expectation that at least something is going to bear fruit. And so I had an expectation that if I were to do a podcast, it would bear some fruit for me, and it certainly has. Um, the biggest benefit of the podcast by far is the relationships that it has brought me with the guests. Because I don't know, for example, today I'm releasing an episode with Otters Pundit, the executive director of Ruby Central. Without a podcast, I wouldn't necessarily have a
Correct.
reason for the executive director of Ruby
Correct.
Central to want to talk to me. But because I do have the podcast, we were able to do that. And I think because of the podcast, he actually already knew who I was, and he and
Correct.
I met at RailsConf in Detroit, and we kind of established a relationship that way. But I've been able to talk with all kinds of people who, like I said before, they never would have had a reason to give me the time of day otherwise. And now I've become like friends with these people. And again, it combines with other things. I often see people, I talk with people on the podcast, and then I see them at a conference or something like that, or the other way around. When I went to Rails World in Toronto 2 months ago now, a lot of the people I talked with, like for example, I met the CEO of Big Binary. I didn't know
Hmm.
that's who he was when I first met him. He was just a guy. Um, and then he told me he was the CEO of Big Binary, and we had a great conversation at the conference. And I said, "Hey, do you want to come on the podcast and just continue the conversation?" And so we did, and that kind of takes the relationship to the next level. We'll probably do another podcast sometime, and so that definitely is the biggest benefit that the show has had to me.
Okay, fantastic. Great points. And especially thanks for the point with making something that is not very expensive. I mean, the fact that you are able to produce a podcast in 2 hours, close to that. Uh, I I really like having guests and having these conversations. On the other side, now I can afford this because I'm between jobs. I'm looking for searching for a new job, and I have the time to put it. But I was always, okay, how the hell will I put out 10 hours per week, or I don't know, 5 hours at least per week in order to release episodes? Good point. Good point. I mean, it's better to have something that is not perfect, but it's alive long term, instead of having just a few episodes and after that drop the podcast because it's too expensive to produce. Good.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I heard a tip from Grant Cardone once.
Mhm.
He advised quantity over quality, which sounds very counterintuitive,
Counterintuitive.
and it obviously doesn't apply to everything. But I think with content, um, certain kinds of content, it definitely applies.
Yeah, yeah. And especially if your main objective is to meet people and to form relationships and to make friends. I mean, in there, it has to go long term in order to, instead of having just 5 episodes and that's it. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I want to add something like when I say quantity over quality, it's not that I don't think the content of my podcast episodes is good. I think it is. I'm able to get
I like
I'm
it. I
fortunate
mean,
enough to have. Thank
I
you.
don't
Yeah.
listen to all the episodes, but I don't know, I don't know, one out of four, for sure, I will listen. It depends because me not being in the Ruby world as much, or I should
Yeah.
switch actually to Ruby world because a lot of folks that I like are in the Ruby world. But what is like is general that I listen. So, and it's good quality.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was just gonna say, like, when I say quality, I'm talking about like professional polish and
Mhm.
stuff like that. Like, I don't do that thing that a lot of podcast hosts do, where they like give a summary of the episode before the episode. Like, I think that's great. I would love to do that, but it's like an expense that doesn't really make sense for me.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I say quantity over quality.
Yeah, got it, got it. Actually, this is something that I do. I always add an intro, but now who knows, maybe I'll drop it for the future episode. Good point.
Yeah.
Uh, Switching gears a bit, let's talk about the elephant in the room, AI.
Okay.
What's your feeling on your thoughts? And I'm mostly referring from a software engineer point of view. Do you think AI will impact actually, it's already impacting a lot, but how do you think do you think the hype will go down in the future? Do you actually think it will go up? What's your feeling in this one? How much impact do you think it will add in our industry?
Yeah, good question. Where there's that quote, predictions are hard, especially about the future. And so I'm
Yes.
hesitant to make predictions. But I can comment on the present and past at least.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, from my perspective, the AI hype for programming kind of like had a spike, and then it like went, there's that famous thing, there's the peak of inflated expectations,
Yep.
and all that stuff. Um, there was a peak of inflated expectations for sure, and then it kind of went down to a more reasonable level. I myself never had those insanely inflated expectations, like the expectations that developers are going to get replaced by AI. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Um, but I think if you're not using AI for coding every day, like you're you're fucking up if you're not using AI all the time. Like I'm using AI almost all day every day. Um because like AI can't tell you what to do. And it can't decide what to do. Like you can't tell an AI agent like, "Hey, build me a continuous integration platform,"
Yep.
because
Right.
there's so many arbitrary decisions to make. Like even if an AI were capable of building a continuous integration platform, which I don't see any logical reason why it wouldn't be capable of that someday. Um, if I did that, it wouldn't be my CI system. It would be like if Steve Jobs went to an AI and said, "Hey, make me a really nice phone." Like that phone wouldn't have
Or
been the iPhone.
good point. Fantastic point.
Yeah. Yeah, so it can't decide what to do, but once you've decided what to do, it can handle a lot of the grunt work for you. Like, um, yeah, go ahead.
I know, sorry for the interruption, but it's on the topic. I know that you mentioned in a tweet recently about Cursor AI, and actually, I think you have a video on your YouTube channel with giving Cursor AI a second shot or something like that was the title. Uh, do you feel it's a valuable tool? What are like the use cases where you felt the most is useful?
Yeah. Um, so I'll get to that very shortly, just to
Okay,
round out that other thought. Um, AI can't decide what to do, but once you've decided what to do, it can take out a lot of the mental grunt work. Um,
I see.
like a really good example is like oh, make me a Docker file for such and such. Like that's just grunt work, you know?
Yeah.
It's like I know I want a Docker file. I don't want to have to like go read the docs and look up exactly how to do it. I'm gonna look at it once it's generated and like make sure it matches what I want and stuff like that. But there's no reason for me as a human to waste my precious brain power on figuring out the exact syntax and stuff like that. So for me, it's all about taking out the mental grunt work. Regarding cursor and stuff like that, um, I've watched people use GitHub Copilot, for example, and it's I wasn't terribly it didn't seem like something that was for me because it seemed like just a fancy
Mhm.
autocomplete.
Yeah, I had the
Um,
same feeling.
yeah, and so it's like it's taking out the part of coding that is not the hard part. The hard part is deciding what to type, not doing the actual typing. And like more than half the time, Copilot would give poor suggestions, something that I wouldn't want to keep. Um, and I tried GitHub Pilot on my own, and it was like its suggestions were sufficiently low quality that it was like not a net positive, and so I took it off. But then more recently, I tried Cursor, and it's the same exact idea, almost, where it just like auto completes your code for you. But whether it's the AI models or the specific way it integrates into the editor or whatever, I just found it to be way better. Um, and again, taking out that mental grunt work. Um, I okay, so I don't necessarily want the computer to write my code for me, but writing my tests for me, I think that's a great use case because there's so much boilerplate and stuff
Yeah, yeah,
in tests. The AI isn't smart enough yet to write a complete high quality test, but if I decide what the test is going to be, it can fill in the really low level details for me. And I found that Cursor did a really, really nice job with that. Nicer than Copilot did back when I tried it. Maybe it's better now for all I know.
super.
So that was great. And then the really nice thing is it was smart enough that I could tell it to write a test, I could run the test, and then tell it to write the code to make the test pass, and it would. And it would be like the same code that I would have written most of the time. And so that was great. That's like the dream scenario
Yeah,
that I envisioned way back when. Um, and I think another big key of that is that GitHub Copilot didn't seem to take into account my project code. It would just make a
sorry.
statistical prediction
Yeah,
based on code from the world, not something that was fitted to my code. And Cursor does that, and that makes all the difference in the world. Then I saw a friend of mine using something called SuperMaven for NeoVim.
mhm.
I'm like, okay, well, that's really nice because then I don't have to switch from my main editor, which is Vim, to Cursor. And I can still use Tmux and all that stuff. So I switched to that, and that was even better
As well.
still. Yeah, and so that's what I do now, and I could never dream of going back after
Okay,
this.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. I'll have to, for sure, I'll have to give it a try. I just played a bit with it, but after hearing you, for sure we'll have to give it a try. Uh, we are getting close to the podcast, and here is one final question I ask all my guests, and I know it's quite a general question and quite a hard question, I think, but I hope at the end to make a big compilations with all of the answers. The question is, in your opinion, how do you think one is able to become a really valuable software engineer, someone who truly mastered the craft and also is able to add real value to a team, someone who really earns his or her keep.
Yeah. And so I heard something from Elon Musk once about how he learns new things quickly. Because, in my understanding, he knows a lot about rockets and electric cars and these different things that are like really difficult things, but he's able to have competencies in these different areas. And he likened it to a tree. There's these branches, and I'm totally paraphrasing now, but like if you just have to get the leaves individually, that might be hard. But if you start with the trunk and you give yourself a solid trunk and then some branches off of it, then it's trivial to add the twigs and leaves and stuff onto that. And so I make an effort to do that. And so I like to try to understand, as crazy as it sounds, I like to try to understand the world as well as I can, and in like a fundamental way, not just like what's going on in Israel right now or something like that, like current affairs and stuff like that. I mean, like very deeply, like the origin of the universe, and then like how did human beings evolve, what makes people behave the way they do, all that stuff, the history of philosophy and the history of thought and stuff like that, history of science, how do scientists know what they know, and that kind of stuff. So really going to the fundamentals. And it's my opinion that learning that stuff makes it easier to learn these more day-to-day things like various programming principles and stuff like that, because you have a very sturdy foundation for these things to rest on.
Fantastic. Great point. I like it. Where can people find you? Where would you recommend someone to go to follow you? And
you can find everything I do starting from codewithjason.com.
Okay, that's the main gateway to the Jason universe, the Code with Jason universe.
Yep, and that's the name of my podcast, the Code with Jason podcast. And then again, the book, if, dear listener, you happen to be a Rails developer, my book is called Professional Rails Testing, and that can be found on Amazon.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jason. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
All the best.